through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. June 9, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Saturday Nitro. ECW and USWA team up. Tank Abbott Myth Tanks, tons more. By Observer staff. Sending the likes of Ric Flair, Sting, Eric Bischoff and Bobby Heenan to Los Angeles on May 30th for the biggest first-day promotion in WCW history resulted in what would have to be called a solid but not spectacular first day of sales for WCW's show on June 28th at the Great Western Forum in Los Angeles. The show billed as Saturday Nitro, in which the WCW announcing team will all appear for a non-televised card that goes head-to-head with a WWF event the same night at the Anaheim Pond, sold just under 4,000 tickets for $98,000 the first day, and as of June 2nd the numbers had increased to 5,054 tickets and $120,651. The WWF show, which has had tickets on sale for several weeks, had sold around 3,000 tickets as of June 2nd. Although the WWF lineup for the show would have to be considered as somewhat loaded, this appears to be more of a war from the WCW side as opposed to WWF, which aside from the bikini tanning contest with Sable, Marlena, Sunny, and Chyna, is running the same card for Anaheim that it is doing all weekend. The WCW house show has a stronger lineup than virtually any pay-per-view it has run in recent months, climaxing with a non-match confrontation at the end of the show with Hulk Hogan and Sting. The revised card consists of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash defending the WCW Tag Team titles against the Giant and Lex Luger, Ric Flair vs. Roddy Piper, Diamond Dallas Page vs. Randy Savage, Syxx vs. Rey Mysterio Jr. for the Cruiserweight title, Hector Garza and Lizmark Jr. and Juventud Guerrera vs. Conan and La Parca and Villano 4, Dean Malenko vs. Eddie Guerrero, Rick and Scott Steiner vs. Scott Norton and Masahiro Chono and Ultimo Dragon vs. Psicosis. The WWF show is headlined by a triangle match for the WWF title, which at last word would be the return of Bret Hart, although that isn't a definite. The last lineup we had for the show was the triangle match for the WWF title with Undertaker, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. I'd suspect that Steve Austin would replace Hart in the triangle match should Hart not be ready by that date. Steve Austin vs. Brian Pillman in a no DQ match. Davey Boy Smith vs. Sid for the European title. Owen Hart vs. Goldust for the IC title. Legion of Doom vs. Godwins, Rocky Maivia vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Vader and Mankind vs. Farouk and Crush, Flash Funk vs. Rockabilly, Blackjacks vs. Doug Furnace, and Phil LaFon in the tanning contest. The only major change from the originally planned lineup is eliminating the Ken Shamrock vs. Vader match. WCW did even better the same day in Detroit for promotion of its August 4th Monday Nitro date at the Piston Palace in Auburn Hills, Michigan, with sales as of June 2nd topping 6,200 tickets and $144,000, which already beat the 5,088 tickets and $103,749 that the WWF ended up doing for its May 23rd house show in the same building. Yet another head-to-head confrontation will be taking place even sooner, with WWF running its King of the Ring pay-per-view in Providence, Rhode Island on June 8th and a Raw taping on June 9th in Hartford, Connecticut, while WCW debuts at the Fleet Center in Boston with a Nitro taping. King of the Ring, with the card somewhat revised this past week, had sold 6,650 tickets for $159,132 as of June 2nd, so the show isn't expected to sell out the 16,000-seat Civic Center, even though it had been advertised until June 2nd that the card would feature the first return match between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels since their WrestleMania main event more than 1 year ago. With Hart's knee not recovered enough to put him back even in a short gimmick match and Brian Pillman's ankle not 100%, and the feeling would be not have him overextend himself in a match that would have to carry the show, both were pulled from the card. As announced on the June 2nd Raw show, Michaels vs. Austin will be the match to carry the show, while the other non-tournament matches will be Undertaker defending the WWF title against Farouk, Legion of Doom and Sid vs. Jim Neidhart and Owen Hart and Smith and Crush vs. Goldust. King of the Ring matches will be Jerry Lawler vs. Mankind and Ahmed Johnson vs. Helmsley, with the winners meeting for the Core Championship. Pillman vs. Austin will headline the Raw taping in Hartford, Connecticut, where there won't be as much pressure on the two to have a match to carry the show, and more importantly, won't have to do a 20-minute match. WCW will break company records for both attendance and live gate on June 9th. As of June 2nd, there were 15,350 tickets sold for $231,946, the latter breaking the company's all-time gate record set last October for the Hulk Hogan vs. Randy Savage match in Las Vegas. The company record for tickets is 15,834 set for the January Nitro in Chicago. As of June 2nd, there were no tickets available. However, they are going to open up hundreds or perhaps thousands of killed-off seats this week in those curious problems, as how every week they can't get the building ticketing situation straight, and after announcing a sellout locally and pulling ticket sales off the market, they almost routinely have several hundred seats to fill at the last minute. However, when it comes to dollars, the biggest upcoming advance of all belongs to the WWF, not WCW, for the August 2nd SummerSlam pay-per-view show at the Meadowlands, which has sold 9,298 tickets for more than $321,000. ECW and USWA have agreed at least to a limited interpromotional angle between the two companies, which would also be pushed on WWF television. The angle actually started a few weeks back when they hooked up Rob Van Dam with Jerry Lawler on Raw. On Memphis television on May 31st, Lawler issued a challenge to anyone from ECW to come into the USWA and face him, which will probably be announced this coming week to set up USWA's return to Memphis on June 14th, with Lawler versus Tommy Dreamer. Lawler was scheduled to accompany Van Dam to the ECW arena in a surprise angle on the June 7th show, though at press time due to a lot of booking changes being done in ECW due to injuries. That is not a definite, although one would expect Lawler will eventually appear. There was supposed to be an angle involving ECW, probably Dreamer and Paul Heyman, with Lawler on the June 2nd Raw show. However, due to all the booking having to be reworked in ECW, Heyman and Dreamer had to cancel, but they, along with Van Dam, are scheduled for the June 9th Raw in Hartford. The myth of Tank Abbott fell to the reality of Vitor Belfort. The two pro wrestlers came up with mixed results. Yet another last-minute court fight, solid promotion of the next main event, and a 3:20 a.m. hotel brawl were the highlights and lowlights of the May 30th UFC pay-per-view from Augusta, Georgia. The show, perhaps more noteworthy for the fact that it was blacked out by so many major cable companies, drew an overly rabid 4,100 paid fans to the Richmond County Civic Center. It was described as the rowdiest crowd in UFC history, with lots of alcohol served and several fights breaking out in the stands. But those likely paled in comparison to a brawl at the post-match party among the entourage of Vitor Belfort and Tank Abbott, the two participants in the main event that ended about 4 hours earlier. It was apparently precipitated by Al Stonka, Belfort's elderly boxing coach, getting into an argument with Abbott, and Abbott slapped him. At this point, Khalid Ismail, who worked the last UFC, shoved Abbott, who took a spill, and blows were thrown. Drinks were thrown back and forth before the situation was calmed down by promoters David Isaacs and Bob Merowitz with help of Mark Coleman and Carlos Barreto. Coleman himself, while acting as a peacemaker, was in a rumbling mood because of being bent out of shape by the upset loss of two-time World Cup freestyle champion Royce Alger earlier that night. It was the typical weekend with Abbott's Huntington Beach gang in town. With Huntington Beach was here graffiti on the streets near the hotel and a hole punched through one of the hotel walls. While that skirmish was fairly brief, it was still lengthier than the 53 seconds that Belfort needed to put Abbott away when referee John McCarthy stopped the main event with Belfort on top of Abbott throwing punch after punch. As usual, the event was threatened by a series of last-minute court fights. On Thursday, the Georgia Boxing Commission and the Georgia Attorney General went to court for a temporary restraining order to stop the show, but were turned down in Richmond County Superior Court by Judge Bernard Mulherin, who said the decision was an easy call. The standards in Georgia for the state getting a TRO would be to prove that if the event were to take place, it would do irreparable harm to the state of Georgia. The judge ruled that stopping the event would only do irreparable harm to the promoters. In the hours before the show was to take place, the state appealed the decision to the Georgia Supreme Court, which refused to hear the case. If the ruling had gone against UFC, it could have killed the show, because reports are that Semaphore Entertainment Group did not have a backup site in Alabama booked because nobody saw this court fight by the Boxing Commission coming. In the city of Augusta, Georgia itself, there was no local football game involving local politicians, as the opposition came only from Atlanta. In fact, the mayor of Augusta appeared at the fighters' meeting the day before the show with a proclamation declaring May 30th Ultimate Fighting Day in the state of Augusta and thanking Semaphore Entertainment Group for bringing the event to his city. As far as the two pro wrestlers who were involved in the show, there was a tournament winner and a first-round loser. In the under 200 division, and there were legitimate weigh-ins the night before the show, Guy Mesder of Pancrase captured the $20,000 first prize in scoring two very hard-fought victories. In the first round, Mesder, sans his trademark long hair and ponytail that he's had since the age of about 12, captured a unanimous decision over Christoph Leininger after the two went the 12 minutes time limit and a 3 minutes overtime. Leininger is currently ranked number 6 in the nation at 209 pounds in judo. In the championship match, Mesder, who was saying after the tournament that he would rather compete in the heavyweight division, apparently feeling the loss of weight hurt his strength, forced a very tough Abbott protege, alternate Tito Ortiz, to tap out from a front guillotine. Ortiz is the current California Junior College state champion wrestler this past season at Golden West College, who is headed next year to National Power Cal State Bakersfield on scholarship. In order to keep his collegiate eligibility, Ortiz was doing this tournament without pay, which is a first for this event. Mesger is now 4-0 in UFC competition, the only unblemished UFC record of a fighter with that many matches in the sport's 4-year history, with the exception of Mark Coleman. The more well-known pro wrestler in the United States, Tony Halmate, WWF's Ludwig Borga, a former star with both New Japan Pro Wrestling and the CWA in Europe, only lasted 57 seconds before being choked out by U.S. Greco-Roman national champion at 213 pounds, Randy Couture. Couture, who came in at 225 pounds, wound up winning the heavyweight tournament, beating 290-pound Stephen Graham in the finals. From a production standpoint, this was among the best UFC shows to date. It was easily the best-paced show, with none of the lengthy dead time that has marred previous shows. The show was largely well-received. The matches were slightly better than the typical UFC show, with a few surprise finishes. They did a good job of building up Maurice Smith, who faces Mark Coleman in the main event on the next show, July 27th, in Birmingham's Boutwell Auditorium. Smith's heavyweight championship from defunct rival Extreme Fighting was acknowledged, and it was pushed as an interpromotional title unification match. They aired footage of Smith's previous matches, both with EFC and also with Pancrase from Japan. Smith did an interview and showed what everyone on the inside already knew, that he is a total professional when it comes to hyping a fight from his years of experience as a world-class kickboxer. Smith said he understood the ground game and that Coleman doesn't understand the stand-up game and how to work the ring, and that's why he's sure he'll win. Coleman, who was in a Shawn Michaels state of mind doing his interview to build up the match, was hardly as professional, obviously down about Alger's loss and saying he was going to take Smith down and beat the shit out of him and use the F-word to boot, much to the chagrin of Semaphore Entertainment Group, which wasn't looking for anyone to swear on a live pay-per-view show considering the political trouble they're already in. That next show will also feature 2 tournaments, but with the results of this show, most of what was on the drawing board for the heavyweight tournament has been thrown out. The idea of the lightweight division was originally for the winner of this tournament to face Jerry Bollander to determine the first UFC under 200 champion, but with stablemate Mesger winning, that scenario is also in doubt. There is a Lion's Den rule against 2 Lion's Den fighters going against each other because of potential suspicions it would arouse and potential problems it could entail. Ken Shamrock did agree to waive that proviso because Semaphore Entertainment Group wasn't going to let Mesger in the tournament unless he agreed to fight Bollander should he win. But at that time, everyone assumed that Alger would win the tournament and it wouldn't end up being that potential problem. For the first time on one of its broadcasts, UFC announcers Bruce Beck and Jeff Blatnick acknowledged the political problems the fledgling sport is facing. Beck and Blatnick told fans that they needed to call their cable companies to protect the survival of the sport. Blatnick said that if enough people called to protect their freedom of choice as consumers, then the cable companies would have to listen. As it turned out, there were several Time Warner systems, including in Manhattan, that carried this particular event, but is the last NHB event carried by any Time Warner systems. Both Jones Cable and Adelphi Cable have joined TCI, Time Warner and Cablevision in dropping carriage of UFC effective with the July 27th show. Those pullouts have caused requests to also drop carriage of the show, since less than 50% of the homes it services would be able to order the shows. Obviously, the problems threaten the survival of UFC, and there will be several rule changes announced before July 27th designed to both not change the basic nature of the sport but to attempt to make those who have dropped carrying the events to change their decision. Ironically, the problems have a small upside to the promotion to go along with the obvious major downside. With its competitors being forced out of business, both by the inability to make a profit along with the political situation with the cable companies, the UFC has at its disposal a far deeper base of talent to choose from than ever before in its history. Even with the cutting down of purses due to declining revenue, there are still more fighters, and quality fighters at that, interested in being in UFC, since it is the only avenue for exposure in the United States in this genre. Tito Ortiz 1-0 beat Wes Alberton 0-1 in the under 200 alternates match in 31 by taking him down and throwing punches and elbows under Alberton's corner, threw in the towel. This match aired on tape during the pay-per-view show, since Ortiz ended up fighting in the championship match. In the over 200 alternates match, Jack Nelson, 1-0, a local kickboxer, beat Syed Hashemi, 0-1, in 124 when the referee stopped the match after Nelson was punching and elbowing Hashemi in the back of the head while holding his long ponytail for leverage. Hashemi evidently didn't realize the lesson others have in similar situations about long hair and excessive vanity inside the octagon equaling stupidity. 1. In the under 200 first round, Mesger, 3-0, beat Leininger, 0-2, via unanimous decision after the two went 12 minutes of regulation time and 3 minutes of overtime. Mesger dominated both on his feet and on the ground, but didn't look overly impressive in doing so. Leininger wore his judo gi, which Mesger held onto to keep Leininger from getting away, while Leininger held onto Mesger's trunks to keep him from getting distance to throw punches. Leininger had recently won the Best in the West submission fighting tournament. He scored one nice takedown, but Mesger managed a reversal immediately. Much of the match saw Leininger protect himself from serious damage in the guard. In the overtime, Mesger grabbed a front facelock and threw a few knees. Even though Mesger won, the crowd wasn't thrilled with the match, sometimes booing it, and there was no great reaction to the decision. 2. In the under 200 first round, Enson Inoue, 1-0, 9-2 overall, beat Royce Alger, 0-1 in 137 with an armbar submission. Alger weighed in at 208 the night before, so had to be like a wrestler making weight and cut down to get to 200. Inoue is a purple belt champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and fights in Japan for the Shudo promotion. Alger took Inoue down immediately, but Inoue got the guard. Alger threw a few punches and forearms from the top, one of which cracked Inoue's sinus. Alger got his arm caught, and mistakenly tried to break the hold by taking the natural reaction of lifting his way out of the hold, which only makes things worse, and Inoue turned the hold and got a submission. A tremendous finish. Inoue wanted to continue, but when he sneezed backstage, there was a problem and Dr. Richard Istrico ruled he couldn't come out for his championship match because of the nose injury. 3. In the over 200, Stephen Graham, 1-0, beat Dmitry Stepanov, 0-1, with a key lock armlock in 130. Graham is a 290-pound ex-Division II football All-American who is built very similar to WCW wrestler Ice Train. He appears to be far more athletic but with similar size and bulk. He was supposed to be an impressive-looking patsy here, so Stepanov could be built up since UFC is planning on doing a show in September in Russia, but he has improved a lot. Graham picked Stepanov up and did a great slam on the side of his head, and as the crowd chanted USA, worked the arm into the submission. 4. In the over 200, Randy Couture, 1-0, beat Tony Halme, 0-1, in 57 seconds. This was billed as an amateur wrestler against a pro wrestler. Jeff Blatnick said that we all know the WWF is not competition, but Couture is used to competition. Halme was billed at 300 pounds, meaning Couture was giving up 75 pounds. Halme looked heavier than he did when he legitimately weighed 288 at the Rings show in April. Couture immediately took Halme down and began punching him. Halme turned his back, and Couture got the choke in. 5. For the under 200 championship, Mesger, 4-0, beat Ortiz, 1-1, in about 2 minutes of a somewhat controversial match. It should be noted that Mesger had far more professional experience, but Ortiz appeared to be the stronger of the two, although that may have been because he went into the match fresher. Ortiz expended almost no energy in a 31 seconds first-round match, while Mesger went in extremely tired from his 18 minutes first-round match. Mesger tried to shoot, but was blocked, and Ortiz got on top and threw a few punches. Ortiz had Mesger cradled and threw some hard knee shots, 2 of which opened Mesger up. Ref John McCarthy then made what some would call a controversial ruling in breaking it up and having Mesger's cuts checked. When he was cleaned up and ruled able to continue, the bout restarted. Ortiz shot in, but in doing so left his neck open, and Mesger immediately applied a great guillotine for the tap-out victory. Ortiz was really upset since this was something of a Shamrock-Abbott rivalry by proxy match, and also because he seemed the stronger of the two and lost because he fell into a trap. 6. Couture, 2-0, beat Graham, 1-1, to win the heavyweight tournament in 3:13. Couture immediately took Graham down and threw a lot of punches and a few knees. Couture threw a few headbutts and Graham butted back until both had their heads split. Finally, McCarthy stopped the match with Couture on top, throwing several punches to the back of the neck. 7. Vitor Belfort, 3-0, 4-0 overall, beat Tank Abbott, 6-5, in 53 seconds. Abbott was announced at 275 pounds, but actually weighed in at 248, which is the lightest he's ever been for a UFC match, so he was serious with his training for this one. Belfort was announced at 210 but was told he weighed in at closer to 220. Belfort took Abbott down first, but Abbott managed a quick reversal and stood up instead of trying to fight Belfort on the ground. That was his fatal mistake, because in going toe-to-toe with a guy with radar hands and blinding speed, Abbott was destroyed with punch after punch until he was down and pounded on, and McCarthy had to stop the match. Abbott at the moment seemed to realize just how outclassed he was, as he didn't complain at all about the decision and shook hands and hugged Belfort, something he hadn't done in previous losses. However, later in the night, with a few drinks in him, he and his friends did start complaining about the fight being stopped too soon. Even if one is to argue that was the case, and I certainly didn't see it that way, it wasn't like it would have lasted 30 more seconds under any circumstances. It is no secret the promotion is building up for Coleman vs. Belfort on its December pay-per-view show if everything goes according to plans. Of course, in UFC, nothing ever goes exactly according to plans. Belfort earned $50,000 for the win. There are those in Belfort's camp who want him to pull out of UFC and concentrate on boxing because they believe he has gold medal potential for 2000 and a successful pro boxing career is more lucrative than NHB. The biggest surprise of the 1997 version of the New Japan Top of the Super Juniors tournament is that perennial finalist Jushin Liger won't be in the championship match on June 5 at Tokyo Budokan Hall. Instead, it is guaranteed there will be a first-time winner of the tournament when Koji Kanemoto faces El Samurai. Liger was pinned by Kanemoto in 23:58 with a moonsault in the match to determine the A Block Championship on June 1 in Odawara. Liger and Kanemoto had both gone into their match with 4-1 records in their 6-match block tournament, which meant the winner would be in the championship match. It would be the first time since the tournament became an annual affair in 1991 that Liger had not made the finals, besides 1995, when he was out of the tournament with a broken ankle, and 1993 when he injured his ankle during the tournament. Samurai has gone to the finals twice, losing to Liger in 1992 and to Wild Pegasus, Chris Benoit, in 1993, while this will be Kanemoto's first trip to the finals. In the B block, both Samurai and Shinjiro Otani went into their June 3 match in Yamagata with 4-1 records, with Samurai scoring the pin in 18:35. We don't have the final standings at press time, but as of June 2, the remainder of the A block saw Tatsuhito Takaiwa tied with Liger for second place with 4 wins, Grand Naniwa with 3, Ian Dean with 2, and Chavo Guerrero Jr. and Dr. Wagner Jr. with 1. In the B block, Chris Jericho finished tied with Otani for second place with a 4-2 record. Yoshihiro Tajiri and Hanzo Nakajima had 3 wins, and Robbie Brookside and Scorpio Jr. both had 1 win. Liger lost in the finals to Norio Oniga in 1991 to set Oniga up as a rival for in-title matches, beat Samurai in 1992, beat Super Delphin in 1994, and lost to Black Tiger, Eddie Guerrero, in 1996. Pegasus is the other 2-time champion, having won in 1993 and 1995, being Otani. Another of the most accomplished light heavyweight wrestlers in modern times, Great Sasuke, signed a 6-month contract with the WWF, where it is believed he'll become the focal point of that promotion's new division. Sasuke Masanori Murakawa, 27, held a press conference on May 28 in Tokyo to announce the signing. He said the WWF offered him a 1-year contract, but that he would only agree to a 6-month deal since he is president of his own Michinoku Pro Wrestling promotion. Sasuke will finish up with the next Michinoku tour, which ends on June 22, and debuts with the WWF on the June 30 Raw is War show, facing independent junior champion Taka Michinoku, which will probably be something of the kickoff to the new division. The WWF is making a new set of championship belts, and a lighter weight belt is among them, and it is believed the division in its inception will be built around Sasuke, who would likely defend his crown against other wrestlers from the Michinoku and possibly FMW promotion, along with Americans and potentially wrestlers from EMLL as well. One of Sasuke's rivals of a few years back, Jinsei Shinzaki, wrestled in the WWF as Hakushi. The WWF needed an international star to jump-start the division, lest it be built around inexperienced Americans or wrestlers that the company had already been established as jobbers. However, in doing so, it does look like WWF is copying WCW, since WCW has been successful in building a cruiserweight division. Sasuke signing with WWF is a bigger deal than just the president and top star of a smaller Japanese office leaving his company for 6 months. After Sasuke and 5 others from his promotion appeared on ECW shows in February and again on the April 13 pay-per-view show, WCW and New Japan attempted to pressure Sasuke into not wrestling with either ECW or WWF. Through WCW, New Japan told the Michinoku office that if their wrestlers appeared on future WWF or ECW shows, that the promotion ties between New Japan and Michinoku would be severed, which means the Michinoku wrestlers couldn't appear on the several upcoming lucrative dome shots, and it would kill the already set up angle of Sasuke and Liger as a tag team against Kaientai Deluxe and New Japan Juniors Otani and Kanemoto. Sasuke was asked about the problem at the press conference and pretty well acknowledged New Japan had made that ultimatum and indicated by his signing what his answer to the ultimatum was. One would suspect Sasuke would return to Japan for a few major shows with his promotion this year but not appear as a regular on any of the tours. He said at the press conference that he had a dream of presenting his six-man tag team main event on a Madison Square Garden house show in the year 2000. It's funny how Japanese think based on the past. Sasuke was a huge wrestling mark growing up and a mark for major promotion belts, so the idea of being WWF light heavyweight champion and being a Japanese wrestler who is successful in the United States, which was the elusive Japanese dream in previous decades, is a big deal. As is the case in almost every instance, people who grew up as wrestling fans have something in their blood that tend to make them take those extra chances, work extra hard and ignore the injuries and become the top caliber of worker which Sasuke has made himself in just 7 years as a pro. But the idea of appearing in Madison Square Garden, which when he was growing up was portrayed in the Japanese wrestling magazines as the ultimate, is more important to him than appearing on a major pay-per-view show, which today really is the ultimate in the United States. The first 2 weeks after Monday Nitro moved back to its normal time slot head-to-head with the WWF Raw saw ratings revert back to their normal pattern. On May 26, Nitro drew a 3.28 rating, 3.18 first hour, 3.38 seconds hour, and 5.48 share to Raw's 2.78 rating, 2.28 first hour, 3.28 seconds hour, and 4.41 share. Nitro Replay did a 1.6 rating and 3.9 share. It had to be considered an overall victory for WCW in that they won despite having been out of their regular time slot for 1 month and with WWF hyping several matches, including the return to the ring of Shawn Michaels in a tag team title match and The Undertaker's secret angle, while WCW didn't push anything in particular going in. However, one major solace is that the WWF, in presenting one of its best Raw shows ever, saw its rating pick up greatly in the second hour, which goes against the normal trend, and actually win the final 15 minutes. WWF having the finish of the Michaels and Austin vs. Owen Hart and British Bulldog tag title change and The Undertaker interview where he went back with Paul Bearer won the final quarter by a 3.9 to 3.3 margin. WCW had the finish of Harlem Heat vs. Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael in the latest Eric Bischoff, Hulk Hogan, Sting deal at the same time. Since WCW always ends the show with a major scene usually involving the NWO, it has owned the last 15 minutes for the past year. WCW won the other 7 quarter hours, only a few of which were close, but peaked early with a 3.6 for the Great Mutomasa Chono angle. On June 2nd, both Raw and Nitro presented what would have to be considered average shows. WWF did try to book more into the show, but the angles came off too contrived and forced. Nitro did a 3.35, 2.98 first hour, 3.73 seconds hour rating and 5.55 share to Raw's 2.49 rating, 2.35 first hour, 2.63 seconds hour, and 4.01 share. Nitro Replay did a 1.7 rating and 4.0 share. Nitro opened slow, but picked up steam with Steiners vs. Muta and Chono, 2.6 to 3.4, then stayed basically flat until the Ric Flair vs. Scott Hall match, which did 3.7 and 4.7 quarters. The final quarter also included the Randy Savage/Gene Okerlund J.J. Dillon angle. Tony Schiavone in particular deserves a lot of credit for the Flair Hall rating by continually throughout the show building the matchup as the biggest match in the history of Nitro and selling it as if it was a pay-per-view show caliber main event. For that final quarter, when WWF presented Undertaker against the return of Sid, WCW more than doubled the 2.3 rating that Raw did. Raw did basically a normal pattern up to that point, peaking at 2.9 for the second half of the Road Warriors vs. Austin and Michaels and the Mankind feature, but even that segment lost to WCW's 3.2 for Harlem Heat vs. Damien and Cyclope and Chris Benoit vs. Barbarian, before Raw went into its decline against the Flair Hall match. This week's Weekly Variety had a story on the Monday Night Wars. The story talked about the combined ratings the two shows do on Mondays, and had the usual Vince McMahon complaints about Ted Turner trying to put him out of business, stealing his wrestlers and pouring money down the drain with the purpose of buying television ratings. Turner officials called McMahon's complaints sour grapes because their show wins every week. Both McMahon and TNT president Brad Siegel admit that both television shows are money losers despite their ratings. We haven't been able to adapt to market conditions as quickly as we should have, McMahon is quoted as saying, but we're not losing nearly what Turner's organization is. That guy is spending Time Warner's money like it's water. Siegel claimed the opposition is exaggerating the money lost on wrestling, saying that Nitro is not profitable yet, but it's pretty damn close. If one, or both shows are money losers, it makes the fact that each group seems to focus its resources primarily on Monday night that much more curious. Television has traditionally, when it comes to wrestling, been a loss leader. The shows themselves don't make the company money but are used to promote events and push merchandise. However, with Titan and WCW both not wanting to spend that much time doing hard sells during the show for PPVs because of fear of viewers switching, and if the shows aren't making money on their own, the strategy of fighting for ratings numbers above all else is really perplexing, since ratings numbers aren't where the money is made. And any study of pro wrestling worldwide shows that there is no correlation between good ratings and drawing crowds or running a profitable company. The bottom line for a company is just that, the bottom line. WWF lost $4 million when it had Monday to itself and was drawing big ratings each week. WWF was said to have been profitable last year while ratings were at their all-time low, so to me that says the obvious purpose of television is not to draw ratings, but to put on shows that draw money. The angles, such as the return of Shawn Michaels, are better saved for PPVs than blown on free television for whatever minuscule ratings bump they deliver. There were a few tragedies over the weekend in pro wrestling involving deaths of former wrestling promoter Gene Reed of Denver and the daughter and granddaughter of former wrestling television announcer Dave Brown of Memphis. Reed, 77, was found dead at his home shortly after noon on Friday. Although there were no signs of a forced entry to his home nor marks showing a struggle on his body, police were investigating the death as being suspicious. Reed, financially well off, living in a high-class neighborhood with a propensity for hanging around beautiful women much younger than he, had been robbed a few weeks earlier and confided in friends that he was afraid something serious was about to happen to him. Reed promoted pro wrestling for the AWA at the Denver Auditorium Arena from the late 1960s through the late 1980s. Before the WWF expanded nationally, Denver was a solid traditional AWA city that generally drew about 4,000 fans for its monthly shows, more during hot periods or with loaded-up shows. The situation with Brown, the most popular television weatherman in the Memphis area besides hosting the local live pro wrestling television show on and off for nearly 30 years before quitting a few months back, was even more tragic. Brown's youngest daughter, Denise, was having her rehearsal dinner on Friday night for a planned wedding the next day. Another daughter, Stephanie, and her 9-month-old child were driving home from the dinner when their car was struck by a drunk driver going 85 to 90 miles per hour with a revoked license. Stephanie was pronounced dead on the scene while the 9-month-old died the next day. Lance Russell, Brown's longtime sidekick on Memphis Wrestling, opened the television show the next morning talking about the tragedy. Japanese television rundown. May 18, All Japan. 1. Baba and Ikeda and Kimura beat Masao Inoue and Fuchi and Eigen in 1456. This was better than the typical comedy match because of Ikeda, who is a smaller wrestler from Battlers, a shoot-style promotion. As with most shoot-style workers who try the traditional style, he was weak in pro selling and his offense, particularly kicks and submissions, was very strong. He had a breath of fresh air and totally made this match, particularly in with Inoue and Fuchi. The rest of the time it was the typical match, with Baba and Kimura in their advancing years being even slower than before. Baba pinned Eigen after a leg sweep while Inoue and Ikeda were having a pull-apart brawl at the finish and after the match. 1 1/4 stars. 2. Williams and Lacrosse beat Misawa and Akiyama in 440. This was a fast-paced, stiff match. Everything about the match was good, but the crowd has been taught not to react to anything early, so the short match never got big reactions. It got reactions because the work by all four was good. Lacrosse, former WCW pathetic warrior wannabe Jim Steele, has sure come a long way both in terms of ability and miles. Finish saw Williams drop Akiyama on his head with a backdrop driver. There was a big pop for the finish because it happening so early was a surprise, and the idea of Williams and Lacrosse beating former tag team champions was something the crowd wasn't expecting at all. 3 stars. May 24, New Japan. 1. Yamazaki made Kashin submit to a choke in 8:06. This was a worked UFC-style match, which was kind of weird since Kashin is a masked wrestler. Mainly punches from the mount and headbutts. It was very stiff but didn't get a lot of heat. Even though most of it looked believable, Yamazaki did throw in a vertical suplex. At one point Kashin threw more than 50 unanswered punches from the mount on Yamazaki without the refs stopping it. It was so stiff that Yamazaki had his left eye totally shut, which they showed in a post-match interview. 2 1/4 stars. 2. Koshinaka pinned Kimura in 13:34 with a butt bump off the top rope followed by a power bomb. Shockingly good match, particularly considering Kimura was involved. It was probably the best singles match Kimura has been in for several years. Kimura did a great standing figure 4 which he turned into a reverse figure 4 on the mat. As the match went on they traded big moves and near falls that looked like the finish. This was a total sumo hall style G1 match and proved once again just how good a worker Koshinaka really is. 3 3/4 stars. 3. Dick Togo and Men's Teo and Hanzo Nakajima and Kanemoto and Otani won 2 straight falls from Great Sasuke and Norio Oniga and Samurai and Grand Hamada and Super Delphin. First fall went 9 minutes ending with a triple powerbomb on Delphin by the Kaientai DX group, and then Kanemoto pinned him using a dragon suplex. Good fall but pretty basic. Second fall really picked up, particularly with Sasuke involved, but still the match wasn't as good as you'd think. In particular, Otani and Kanemoto, who are the most solid workers of the group, played more of a bit part here, particularly Otani. Hamada looked really good and Sasuke and Nakajima worked great together. There were a total of 8 dives in the second fall, including 3 sets of simultaneous dives. Finish saw Togo pin Oniga with a senton off the top rope in 10-11. 4 stars. EMLL. We don't have much in the way of news this week. The big show of the week was May 30th at Arena Coliseo, headlined by Lizmark defending the CMLL middleweight title against El Satanico, a 2-on-3 match with Headhunters vs. Shocker and Mascara Magica and Mr. Niebla, and a bout with Negro Casas and Takamichi Noku and Brazo de Plata vs. El Satanico and Gran Marcus Jr. and El Hijo del Gladiador. The latter match has political significance because it shows the protests from the Guadalajara wrestlers are being heated. Casas, as booker, always puts himself in matches with good workers so he can have the best match on the show. In this case, he used Marcus and Gladiador, who are from the old school guys who aren't as good in the ring and would kill his match, apparently as a political concession. Arena Mexico opens up on June 6th, so the shows should pick up. There are some huge things going on behind the scenes politically here that could explode within the next week and totally change Mexican wrestling. Pero Aguayo's nephew Pepe Aguayo is here and everyone is raving about a rookie named Mr. Aguila who we wrote about and who has the potential to be one of the most spectacular wrestlers around. Promo Azteca. The latest TV ratings showed this promotion already surpassing EMLL and AAA in their head-to-head Sunday morning battles. The Azteca show is now doing a 4.5 rating, while EMLL is doing a 4.0 and AAA a 3.8. This has led to the group starting plans for the biggest spectacular in its short history to be held sometime in August at the 30,000-seat Palacio de Deportes in Mexico City with 3 mask versus mask matches. Current plans are to headline with Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Psicosis, Villano 3 vs. Fishman and Universo 2000 vs. Lizmark Jr., all with masks at stake. The June 6th show in Tijuana appears to have been cancelled. The commission locally suspended the promoter's license of Benjamin Mora for 3 months for fraud since he advertised in all the posters that either a mask or head would be shaved in the Rey Mysterio and Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. El Hijo del Santo and Misterioso match on the May 16th show, and in the building they just set it up for the blow-off to be on the June 6th show instead. There will be a loaded show on June 20th with a new promoter. Volador will be coming in under a new name with a Parka-like gimmick as something along the lines of Super Parka. AAA. The May 31st planned Triple Mania show in Juarez was moved to June 8th, while the June 13th show in Tijuana is as scheduled. On television they were pushing a Pierre Roth Jr. vs. Latin Lover match for the Champion of Champions Cup, Cibernetico vs. Connect, a mask match with Los Payasos vs. Super Muñeco and La Parca Jr. and Mascara Sagrada Jr., and a hair match with Heavy Metal vs. Picudo, although they didn't specify which Triple Mania show each of these matches would be taking place at nor announce where and when the third Triple Mania would be. Pierre Roth Jr. beat Latin Lover to win the Mexican National Light Heavyweight title on May 19th in Nuevo Laredo. Pierre Roth brought a board into the ring and tried to hit Latin with it, but he ducked and ref Tirantes, who had been playing heel the entire match, got hit with it. When Tirantes recovered, Pierre Roth sold a non-existent low blow and Tirantes called for the DQ and the title change. In both Mexico and Japan, titles changed via core and DQ. The original plan was for Los Payasos to lose the mask match at Triple Mania, but that may change hands since Antonio Pena is looking to do away with the La Parka Jr. and Mascara Sagrada Jr. gimmicks. Parka Jr. is getting booed in a lot of cities as a copy, while Sagrada Jr. he wants to push as a young heartthrob type without a mask. There will be a decision on who can use the Parka and Sagrada names in court this week, but judging from previous court fights in recent weeks that Pena has lost, it appears he may fold and drop the gimmicks anyway. Pena lost court fights over back royalties on selling gimmicks to Parka, Sagrada and Conan, and he and Televisa have to pay this week. Jake Roberts, Diesel, Razor Ramon and Gorgeous George, Rob Kellum, are scheduled for the Triple Manias. Humberto Garza, the younger brother of Hector, has been plugged into Hector's role as tag team partner of Latin Lover and Heavy Metal, but he isn't anywhere close to as good. They ran a minor show on May 30th in Tijuana which drew 2,500 fans despite the only non-local wrestlers on the show being Octagon, Venom, Hysteria, Huerta Guerrera and Mosco de la Merced. All Japan. Complete lineup for June 6th at Budokan Hall is Mitsuharu Misawa vs Toshiaki Kauda for the Triple Crown, Kenta Kobashi and Johnny Ace and the Patriot vs Steve Williams and Gary Albright and the Lacrosse, Akira Tao and Tamon Honda vs Giant Kimala 2 and Bobby Duncombe Jr., Hayabusa and Jun Akiyama vs Kentaro Shiga and Takao Omori, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota vs Haruka Eigen and Masao Inoue and Masa Fuchi, Yoshinari Ogawa and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi vs Sabu and Rob Van Dam and Satoru Asako and Richard Slinger vs Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Daisuke Ikeda. It was also announced that Kobashi and Ace and Patriot would give their group a name at the show, and Kobashi said that he would ask Hayabusa and Ikeda to join their group. The next tour will be June 28th to July 25th, with the biggest shows being June 29th at Korakuen Hall, June 30th in Osaka, July 19th at Korakuen Hall and July 25th at Budokan Hall. Appearing on the tour will be Stan Hansen, Williams, Ace, Albright, the Patriot, Kimala 2, Lacrosse and Johnny Smith. Patriot's push on this tour and name on the next tour seems to indicate that he's going to stay rather than join WWF as was expected. On May 31st in Sendai, Mori and Akiyama retained the All-Asian Tag Team titles, beating Inoue and Honda, and they did two major singles matches, with Kauda beating Patriot in 5:05 with a high kick and Tao pinning Ace in 20:44 with the choke slam. The main event on the show was Misawa and Kobashi teaming up for the final time in a six-man with Shiga to beat Williams and Slinger and Lacrosse. After the match, Kobashi shook Misawa's hand and thanked him for all the years as a tag team partner. Williams got a big push as well this past week. On May 29th in Aomori, in a six-man tag, Williams dropped Ace on his head and knocked him out. The next night in Honyo, during a tag with Kobashi and Patriot vs Williams and Lacrosse, Williams dropped Kobashi on his head and used a Dr. Bomb on him. While this was going on, Patriot used his full Nelson drop and pinned Lacrosse, however Williams spit on Kobashi and gave him the finger. May 25th television show did a 2.9 rating. New Japan. The big news from this group has been coming from the United States. Besides the Great Muta Angle joining the NWO, there was daily media coverage of Naoya Ogawa in the United States with Antonio Inoki and Satoru Sayama. They returned to Japan on May 30th after spending the last week training with Brad Rheingans in Minnesota and doing photo ops with Road Warrior Animal Don Fry, Dan Severn, and Hickson Gracie. Fry has signed a 4-match deal with New Japan for bouts on August 3rd at Sumo Hall, August 10th Nagoya Dome, November 2nd Fukuoka Dome and January 4th 1998 at the Tokyo Dome. Fry was thrilled about getting the deal because it was big money and also because he felt that if he did well, it would open the doors to WCW in 1998. Fry was wearing an NWO t-shirt at a May 31st show in San Jose, so expect photos in the Japanese mags. The plan appears to be that Fry will get 3 wins to set up a match with Ogawa at Tokyo Dome, although apparently they've also talked about doing a 3-match series between Fry and Ogawa at the next 3 Dome shows. When the Japanese press asked Gracie about the August 15th Tokyo Dome date with Nobuhiko Takada, Gracie refused to comment. The promoters in Japan are still attempting to salvage the show by getting another television station to broadcast the event and pay high rights fees after Nippon TV pulled out. Inoki showed up at the June 1st card in Odawara and said that Eric Bischoff would be coming to Japan in June. He had a knee operation in Minnesota, so he didn't visit Bischoff on this trip. Inoki said his plan would be for Ogawa to go to Los Angeles and train under Hickson Gracie and also to wrestle at WCW. Shinya Hashimoto asked Ogawa to be his second for his June 5th title match against Keiji Muto, while Ogawa will wrestle on the July 6th Sapporo show. That card will be the only appearance until the G1 tournament besides the June 5th show for Masahiro Chono, who will be staying with WCW. Dory Funk was also contacted about doing the Sapporo show, which would be likely against Antonio Inoki. Funk has already been announced for the War Sumo Hall show the same date, but had not agreed to money terms with War when Tenryu made that announcement on May 29. Not much to this tour besides the juniors tournament. They are trying to push the idea that Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi are ripe for losing the IWGP Tag Team titles on June 5 to Chono and NWO Sting. First on May 26 in Takamatsu, they lost a non-title match to Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara. Then at the June 1 television tapings in Odawara, they teamed with Hashimoto in the main event against Takashi Iizuka and Kazuo Yamazaki and Kensuke Sasaki. Kojima and Nakanishi screwed up 3 spots, including a sandwich lariat spot where they lariated each other. Hashimoto got so mad at them, arguing that he hit both of them. Nakanishi after the match said that he didn't want to team with Kojima anymore, so they were doing their Michael/Austin angle. Junior tournament results. May 26 thaw Hanzo Nakajima 2, pin Robbie Brookside 0 in 13:32. Koji Kanemoto 3, pin Ian Dean 0 in 10:27 and Jushin Liger 3, pin Tatsuhito Takaiwa 3 in 15:53. May 27 in Shiga saw Scorpio Jr. 1, pin Brookside in 10:07, Takaiwa 4, beat Dean 2, and Kanemoto 4, beat Chavo Guerrero Jr. 0. May 29 in Uwajima saw Brookside 1, pin Chris Jericho 4, Otani 3, pin Scorpio Jr. 1. May 30 in Cure saw Guerrero Jr. 1, beat Grand Naniwa 2, and Liger 4 over Dr. Wagner Jr. 1. May 31 in Himeji saw Yoshihiro Tajiri 3, beat Brookside, Samurai 4, beat Nakajima 2, and Otani 4, beat Jericho 4, in a match that would have eliminated the loser from contention in the tournament. June 1 in Odawara saw Nakajima 3, beat Tajiri 3, Naniwa 3, beat Takaiwa 4 to eliminate Takaiwa from contention, and Kanemoto 5, beat Liger 4 to win the block. Scott Norton, Marcus Bagwell and Michael Wallstreet were scheduled on the next New Japan tour, but they were all cancelled. Don't know the story behind it, but the only WCW wrestler on the tour will be NWO Sting, as they want to highlight Japanese versus Japanese feuds rather than use Americans as the focal point of the tour. May 24 television showed it a 2.9 rating. Other Japan notes. The first part of the WWF/FMW tie-up appears to be an appearance by Ken Shamrock on the September 29th show at Kawasaki Baseball Stadium. The idea is for Shamrock to do a mixed martial arts worked match which would be broadcast on television in the United States. Right now his scheduled opponent is Gregory Varichev, a Russian who competed in judo in the 1988 Olympics, and I believe won the gold or silver, although I'm not positive of that, and worked as Atsushi Onita's tag team partner with FMW several years back. The downsides of that match are that Varichev was a terrible worker in the match. Because of Varichev, really won't be a big money draw in Japan. However, he does have the credentials and will do the job. Others who have been considered are Kimo wants it as a shoot, Alan goes, ditto, Yoshiaki Fujiwara, too obvious in Japan as a work ahead of time, and someone from Pancrase, who won't work with Shamrock because of the heat between the two sides. The main event right now is scheduled as Onita vs. Wing Kanemura, but they are contemplating shooting an angle to turn Onita heel and join Funk Masters of Wrestling, a la Bret Hart and Hulk Hogan, and feud with Masato Tanaka and Hayabusa. Alex Andrade, a Dallas-based boxer with a 10-1 record who trains under Guy Mesger, debuts for Pancrase on June 30th in Hakata. Pancrase has changed its rules when it comes to ratings. They announced new official top 8 contenders behind champ Yuki Kondo as in order: Masakatsu Funaki, Kyuma Kunyoku, Mesger, Jason DeLucia, Minoru Suzuki, Rishi Yanagisawa, Asami Shibuya and Frank Shamrock. Notice no Boss Rutan. From now on all matches involving ranked wrestlers will have a 15 minutes time limit, and if a ranked wrestler loses, he loses his ranking. They've also cut down on the lost points, rope breaks and knockdowns, to determine a victory down from 5 to 3 to cut down on matches going the time limit. Mark Hall, a UFC veteran with a 4-2 record including a win over Koji Kiao, debuts as a pro wrestler for Kingdom on June 30th against Yui Sano. At Genichiro Tenryu's press conference to announce the Sumo Hall show on July 6, Tenryu said that he would like to wrestle Toshiaki Kawada. When asked about it, Giant Baba said it would be impossible because All Japan has a card on the same day. War has contacted ECW about sending 5 wrestlers to the show, one of which would be Stevie Richards. Although it isn't a done deal and due to the proximity of the show, the deal better be done soon. Tarzan Goto said he wanted to wrestle someone from ECW. Not sure politically what that would do regarding a relationship between ECW and FMW for the planned big November shows. All Japan Women, with attendance in the toilet, changed its booking philosophy. It had been going for years with the All Japan style clean finishes, no heels, no grudge matches. It's a style that can only work when you have super workers who can sell tickets based on that, which AJW had for a number of years, but with the absence of new super workers to keep the mix fresh, the style runs its course. So they've put Itsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda back together as a tag team doing a heel gimmick. On May 26 in Chiba, they challenged WWA Tag Champs Kumiko Maekawa and Tomoko Watanabe and used foreign objects to cause Maekawa and Watanabe to juice. And in a best-of-3 fall match that went 33-32, Shimoda hit the ref for the first DQ finish on an AJW show in years. The June 1st show at Korakuen Hall drew an estimated 1,200 fans, its smallest crowd in years, so it was apparently the time to make the change. Mita and Shimoda used foreign objects and did the heel gimmick to beat Ri Tamada and Yumi Fukawa. After the match, Yumiko Hata, who does a shooter gimmick, kind of their female Taz although she's put her rep on the line by competing in shoot matches, said they were destroying the promotion and said she hates the style and was forming her own group with Kaoru Ito, Watanabe and Maekawa to feud with them. A correction in the note about Jaguar Yokota and Devil Masami as a tag team, saying in 1982 to 1983 they feuded with the Crush Gals. Actually those matches were in late 1984. USWA. They announced on television that they would be returning to the Big One flea market in Memphis on June 14. Recon and Interrogator regained the USWA tag titles from Stephen Dunn and Paul Diamond sometime during this past week at a casino show in a match where Mike Sample's interference led to the title change. The Razor Ramon vs. Diesel feud continues. After Ramon won a television squash, Diesel called him out and told him to either return to the WWF in Stamford, Connecticut or he'd kick his butt right there. Well, you know what happened. The two had one of the most pathetic brawls in the long-vaunted history of Memphis television. For reasons I'm not clear of, in Louisville when these two feud, Diesel goes by the name Unabomb instead of Diesel, which was Glenn Jacobs' ring name in Smoky Mountain Wrestling before going to WWF as Isaac Yankem. Carolina independent wrestlers Roger Anderson and Frank Parker worked this week while the California indie guys that were in last week are already back in California. Anderson billed as Roger Robinson, lost to Mabel, while Parker lost to Billy Travis. Jerry Lawler announced that he was bringing one of his favorite wrestlers when he was a kid out later in the show. It turned out to be Gypsy Joe, now 69, who still wrestles on small-time independent shows in Tennessee and Kentucky. Lawler brought him out and talked about going to pro wrestling as a kid with his father at the old Ellis Auditorium and watching Gypsy Joe, who was one of the Blue Infernos, and talked about him being a wrestling legend. Dutch Mantle came out and said Gypsy wasn't a legend, that he was a wrestling legend and that Gypsy Joe never beat anyone of note during his career and never wrestled with a major wrestling federation. Actually, Joe was something of a name wrestler with All Japan in the 70s. Joe said that during his career he'd beaten a lot of tough guys, and Mantle said that Abraham Lincoln must have been a tough guy and did a bunch of Lawler-style old jokes when he was wrestling. The Dead Sea was only sick. Mantle called him senile and stupid and slapped him and said that Lawler gave him $25 to come to television and it was just for Lawler to get himself over. Actually, it was a great segment due to Mantle. Travis is now managed by Luther Biggs, who claimed to be the manager of the group Deep Purple. Travis also clocked Brian Christopher with his guitar and Christopher juiced heavily. Here and there. Yet another wrestling promotion war is going on in Oregon and Washington between Sandy Barr and Matt Osborne, Matt Bourne. According to the newsletter Ring Around the Northwest, most of the wrestlers sided with Osborne in the split between Barr, a longtime area promoter, and his booker. With few wrestlers, Barr announced he was closing his promotion for a few weeks to reorganize. Osborne has gotten Jeff Caufori, the general manager of a local radio station, to apply for a license to promote in Oregon, which has been for the most part without live wrestling since Barr had his license revoked by Commissioner Bruce Anderson over a series of violations. Barr announced on his May 3 television show that he was shutting down for 3 weeks, citing that the wrestlers had lost their respect for him and they didn't respect equipment. Osborne claimed he and Barr were at odds for several things, one of which was that Osborne wanted to use Josh Wilcox, a football star at the University of Oregon who is a big wrestling fan, but Barr was against it. Osborne also brought up that referee/wrestler Tony Kasinga had been working on Barr's shows the past 4 months without getting paid. Kasinga was on the radio and seemed to want to stay neutral, figuring that he and Bart Sawyer either want to try and work for both promoters or find out which side is going to win the war and side with them, only saying that there were creative differences between Barr and Osborne. Sawyer went on the radio and said that Barr had shown him that it cost him $78,000 to keep his television the past 2 years. Osborne and Kafori are expected to start with a show this month at a casino using Greg Valentine, the Grappler, and Mike Miller on the shows. Osborne, when asked about Bill 908 being tabled, the bill to eliminate the Oregon Wrestling Commission, was a lot more political about the commission than in the past, saying that everything would work out. Steve Nelson's USWF is presenting its biggest show to date on June 20th, billed as the first annual Shoot Wrestling Spectacular, with Nelson defending his middleweight title against Hideki Nakai, Paul Jones against an opponent not yet confirmed for their heavyweight title, Ali Elias vs. Guillermo Luis of Brazil, Donna Coffin vs. Lisa Virgil, and Don Fry vs. Eric Valdez. Nelson has offered Ralph Gracie $10,000 to give him a rematch next year in Amarillo. Gracie beat Nelson in rapid fashion on the second EFC pay-per-view show. Tito Santana vs. Greg Valentine and Doink the Born vs. Coco were headline Worldwide Stars of Wrestling on June 27 in Douglas College in British Columbia and June 28 in Williams Lake, BC. Underground Wrestling Cult of America is scheduling its debut show on July 5 at the Reading, Massachusetts Moose Hall. All Pro Wrestling, which usually runs every third Saturday at the Pacific Coast Sports Gym in Hayward, is back on June 7, after a show this past Saturday with a 6-person mixed tag with Cowboy Lang and Frank Murdoch and Mrs. Brenda vs. Lil Nasty Boy and Steve Rizzono and Miss Gina. Manny Fernandez is no longer affiliated with this promotion. He was booker and camp instructor, and Michael Modest is now the lead camp instructor. They'll continue going every third Saturday after this week. On May 31st in Fall Branch, Tennessee, Southern States Wrestling presented a show billed as Jabroni World Order presents JWO Barely Professional. Among the wrestlers in the JWO, which naturally lost every match, were the Macho Midget, the Insiders, and Dollywood Hulk Cooper, who ended up getting his head shaved at the end of the night courtesy of Jimmy Valiant. NHB. 2 NHB stars competed over the weekend in the national team trials from May 29 to May 31 in Las Vegas to represent the United States in the Freestyle Wrestling World Championships from August 29 to August 31 in Russia. Top-seeded Tom Erickson repeated his win in the U.S. Championships in the 286-pound weight class, but suffered a leg injury in the process, winning 2 matches over mini-tournament winner Tully Thompson, winning the first by pin and the second by an 8-2 score. With Randy Couture doing UFC, Couture pulled out of the June 16 World Vale Tudo tournament in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Erickson was scheduled to take his place, but the leg injury may change those plans. There was an article in the Las Vegas newspaper on Erickson saying he was doing NHB just for the money to subsidize himself to stay in amateur wrestling until the 2000 Olympics. He said he wasn't in NHB to prove that he was the best, but that he didn't like doing fundraisers. Erickson, 3-0-1, and the draw would have been a victory had there been judges, in NHB, is attempting to get into Pancrase as well. Kevin Jackson, who impressed everyone in the last EFC and also captured the World Cup in his weight class this year, ended up winning his mini-tournament at 187 pounds but lost 2 of 3 matches to national champ Leigh Gutches for the right to go to the Worlds in what was said to be the highlights series of the tournament. Gutches won the first match 3-1 and Jackson the second 4-3. The third match went to an 0-0 tie both in regulation and overtime, so the judges voted and Gutches got the spot based on being more aggressive. Gutches beat Jackson via judges' decision to win the Freestyle Nationals as well after they had gone to a draw after overtime. Brian Johnson had a freestyle fighting, basically a submission wrestling match beating John Renfro, who had done Pancrase in several Vale Tudo matches without much success, in 4-11 with a choke as part of a major martial arts show, kickboxing, Muay Thai and the debut of new sport judo, on May 31st in San Jose before 4,000 fans. Paul Verlins, who has dropped quite a bit of weight since his Pancrase match, was the ref. Johnston, who is from San Jose, was about 15 pounds lighter and not as muscular as he was in his ultimate appearance. He got a ton of local radio publicity and a newspaper article, not a well-written article at all, mainly focusing on the fact that he lost in ultimate to Ken, the world's most dangerous man, Shamrock, leading up to the show. Muay Thai is so much more brutal and dangerous than UFC that it's a joke to even make the comparison, and only makes the UFC political problems even more ridiculous. Aside from the show being way too long, most of the matches were great. This was an ESPN2 television taping, so the match should air sometime this summer. If you think WWF TV tapings used to be bad, listen to this. The show started at 7:30 p.m. although tickets listed a 7 p.m. start. We left at 2 a.m. and the show was still going on, although by that time there were only about 100 to 150 fans left, and I have no idea when the show finally ended. Among those in attendance at the show were Don Fry, Chemo, Don Wilson, and Chuck Norris. For whatever this is worth, I was asking around about Ernest Miller, the WCW karate guy who supposedly holds an ISCA World Heavyweight Point Karate Championship, and he probably does the way they dispense world titles like a Pez dispenser, and nobody, and I mean nobody, had ever heard of him. TJ Thompson's UCFC is Hawaii, which is now banned due to the law banning NHB, is going to resurface in Hawaii with new rules making it similar to USWF and Pancrase. ECW lots of booking changes have had to be made due to injuries suffered by Stevie Richards and Perry Saturn. Richards re-injured his neck, suffering a cervical sprain, on the May 30th show in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and is expected out of action for 6 to 8 weeks. The injury was built up from all the neck problems he's been having in recent weeks, as he took a bump from the Eliminators, tagged out and basically blacked out in the corner. The June 7th arena show had been built around Richards getting a title shot at Terry Funk. Saturn, who holds the tag titles, tore both his anterior cruciate ligament and his meniscus on the May 31st show in Trenton, New Jersey, and was scheduled for an MRI on June 3rd and surgery probably later this week. It wasn't exactly his week, as just 3 days earlier his estranged 12-year-old son died in an auto accident. He's likely facing major surgery and will be out of action around 6 months. They'll do an angle at the ECW arena to change the tag team titles, either with Saturn showing up and limping through a short match or with Cronus wrestling a handicap match against the Dudleys vs. Sandman and Balls Mahoney winner. The new June 7th show has Sabu vs. Taz, Funk vs. Condito for the ECW title, Tommy Dreamer vs. Raven, Sandman and Mahoney vs. Dudleys, with the winners theoretically facing Eliminators for the belts, and Pit Bulls vs. FBI. June 6th in Scranton, Pennsylvania has Dreamer vs. Louis Spicolli, Raven vs. Condito, Sandman vs. Devon Dudley with the Kane Legal, Bubba Ray Dudley vs. Mahoney. Raven's final match will be the June 7th arena show, and the plan right now is for him to debut on Nitro on June 9th, and not to return for the pay-per-view. The August 17th pay-per-view show will be called Hardcore Heaven 97. The site hasn't been finalized, but the leading candidate is Cincinnati, Ohio, with Asbury Park, New Jersey as a backup site. The top matches are Funk vs. Shane Douglas for the ECW title, Sabu vs. Sandman, some sort of tag team title match, and Taz against either Condito, Bam Bam Bigelow or Dan Severn. A meeting was held this past week with viewers' choice about carrying the show. Paul Heyman said he thought it was a done deal they'd carry the November pay-per-view, but was hopeful they'd carry this one. He said the problem was with Time Warner not carrying the show, but felt that by admitting that ECW was scripted and in no way a shoot, that Time Warner would agree to carry the show, which in turn would carry over to viewers' choice. Taz is now being called the toughest sob in wrestling, which I thought was Steve Austin's gimmick. Guess that when Jim Ross called Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith the greatest tag team in the world, he was stealing the Eliminators gimmick. Spicolli was out of action this weekend with a partial calf tear. Raven was being heavily criticized for sandbagging it through his matches the past few weeks on the way out. PG-13 worked this weekend, including doing a job for Mikey Whipwreck and Spike Dudley. It now appears Whipwreck won't be getting the knee surgery because he can't afford either the surgery or to take that much time off. WCW. Nitro on June 2nd from Dayton drew a sellout 4,951, paying $70,556. The show opened with Six and Scott Hall. Kevin Nash wasn't there as he and his family were moving this week from Phoenix to Daytona Beach, running down Ric Flair. J.J. Dillon came out and said since Hall challenged Flair, that Flair was flying in and they'd have the match later in the show. Segment was well done. Glacier beat Alex Wright in 1:38 with the kick. Afterwards, Mortis, Wrath and Wright all attacked Glacier. Marcus Bagwell used the buff blockbuster on Joe Gomez in 3:08. Gomez didn't look good. Bagwell has a lot of charisma. Prince Iaukea pinned Hugh Morris in 47 with a schoolboy after Conan had hit Morris with a chair before the match. Dillon did a second interview saying Steiners were the top contenders for the tag titles and Sherry and Harlem Heat started arguing with him. Great Muta and Masahiro Chono beat Steiners in 8:54 of a fairly good match when Stevie Ray hit Rick with a chair. Muta then put a cross kneelock submission on Rick, and they counted Rick's shoulders down for 3. Since when does a guy get pinned with a kneelock? Flair did an interview. Same old stuff. Crowd went nuts. Dean Malenko beat Michael Wallstreet in 6:20 with the cloverleaf to keep the U.S. title despite interference from Jeff Jarrett. Jarrett challenged Malenko to a title match, which will take place on June 9 Nitro, and called him an uncharismatic block of ice. If that's the case, what's Jeff? Steve McMichael came out and did a good interview regarding Kevin Green. Damien and Cyclope beat Harlem Heat when Damien pinned Booker T after a splash off the top in 3:14 after Rick Steiner hit Booker T with a chair. Not bad with a good upset finish, the fans popped for, and Damien looked good. At the finish, Bobby Heenan said he was surprised about the win because Damien and Cyclope haven't been together that long. It would be dangerous if someday the announcers in WCW had a clue what was going on in wrestling. But how can Heenan be expected to know wrestling? During the hype for Los Angeles, he mentioned Sacramento as a suburb of Los Angeles, which would be like having a card in Madison Square Garden and thinking Richmond, Virginia was a suburb. Chris Benoit beat Barbarian in 3:54 with the crossface submission. Very good short match. As Barbarian was tapping out, Heenan was saying that Barbarian would never give up. Flair beat Hall via DQ in 7:49 when Six continually interfered, and finally Hall hit Flair with the tag title belt. They beat on Flair until finally McMichael, and later Jarrett, made the save. Flair did work his ass off and the match drew a great rating. However, Flair has never looked older in the ring, both in moving like an old man and in looking like one physically. It reminded me of Pat O'Connor at the end of his career. Flair is one of the most valuable commodities in this entire business, as the rating showed, but not if he's going to wrestle every Monday night. This match was supposed to go about 20 minutes, but Flair ran out of gas way early and called for the finish. This left them with far too much time, so Gene Okerlund and Randy Savage had to improvise for several minutes before starting their interview. This was one instance where Okerlund and Savage's experience showed as they pulled it off well. J.J. Dillon, who was on the show so many times by this point that you knew he was getting decked, did his part as well. Finally, Savage decked Dillon. Eric Bischoff ran in and tried to calm Savage down as the show went off the air. Besides Nitro, other ratings the past 2 weeks were for May 24th. Main Event did a 1.3 and Saturday Night a 2.3, and for May 31st through June 1st, Main Event did a 1.2, Saturday Night a 2.5 and Pro a 1.5. Add a Benoit vs. Meng Death match and a Steiners vs. Harlem Heat match to the June 15th Bash show. WCW Saturday Night for May 31st and June 7th was taped May 27th in Chattanooga, Tennessee before 3,800 paying $50,300. Horseshoe Hank, Bill Goldberg, the second big bodybuilder in the famous Piper sketch, got a tryout but looked bad. Psychosis was managed by Sonny Ono. Jarrett beat Wright. Hector Garza beat Billy Kidman in a match with a major style clash, since Garza had probably never worked a singles match against an American in his life. Ultimo Dragon beat Damien in the best match of the card. Diamond Dallas Page beat Conan via DQ when Morris attacked Conan. I know, shouldn't Page have been DQ'd? But logic doesn't apply when it comes to Page. The long-awaited grudge match saw Joe Gomez beat Renegade, but Renegade got his heat. Yeah, right. Back by beating up Gomez after the match. Masa Chono and Great Muta won squashes. La Parka beat Rick Fuller in a match that was awful. Page beat Bagwell in a dark match. Preston Manning, who is the leader of the ultra-right-wing Reform Party in Canada, was at a rally last week and someone in the crowd gave him the Wolfpack sign and said sweet, and he responded doing the same thing back, although it was clear he had no idea what he was doing. The company interview rule is that Flair, Piper and Hogan can't be referred to as old, although Flair and Piper can be called fossils. Larry Zbyszko will be on the Celebrity Golf Tour starting in June. That'll give him more time to not spend watching any wrestling. Mike Tenay didn't announce either hour of Nitro this week. Supposedly it was temporary, but nobody seemed to know why. The June 16th Nitro in Chicago has sold more than 11,000 tickets. Bobby Heenan was on the radio this past week in San Diego to push the Los Angeles show. When asked about the Wrestling Observer, Heenan said he'd never heard of it or read it. But that was still better than when a caller asked him about ECW. He just had the host hang up on the caller and never acknowledged the question. Only house show of the week was a sold show on May 31st in Athens, Ohio, which drew $4,756,000. Rey Mysterio Jr. missed the show because his flight came in late and his opponent, Juventud Guerrera's flight, came in 4 hours late. Flair's flight was also late, although since he was in the main event, he was able to go on and teamed with Jarrett to beat Harlem Heat in a bad match because a heckling fan got so under Booker T's skin to the point he hopped the rail, and lost the match. There are people who expect Kevin Sullivan to make a surprise appearance on June 9th because the Boston show is such a big deal to him since it's where he grew up. Supposedly he's still not due back for a few more weeks. Most of the feeling now is that he'll be back as Booker on his return, although there are wrestlers with clout who have complained to Eric Bischoff and wondered if Terry Taylor stay in the spot. The advance for the Ilio DiPaolo Memorial Show on June 6 in Buffalo was $139,000 at press time. Hector Garza was offered the WWF Light Heavyweight title by Victor Quiñones if he'd jumped to EMLL, but he had already signed a WCW contract. Ted DiBiase has disappeared. He missed a few weeks due to going to Tel Aviv, Israel with the 700 Club, and came back for Nashville but wasn't used on television and wasn't even there this week. They talked with him about turning babyface since Bischoff pretty much took his spot. Nasty Boys did a lot of promotional work for Buffalo. They are still with the company but Sags hasn't been cleared to work because of his neck injury that has left him with numbness in his elbow and there is some doubt whether he can come back. Akira Hokuto was backstage in costume at Nitro but never used. Booker T is in a 1-800 collect commercial playing a boxer. WWF. Raw as War drew a sellout $4,945 and $60,245 on June 2 in Huntington, West Virginia. Show opened with Undertaker doing an interview trying to make sure everyone understood he was staying babyface while being with Paul Bearer. Bearer came out and made a comment about ruling the world, which brought out Sid, who challenged Undertaker to a match later in the show. Farouk beat Ahmed Johnson in 3:19 in a match which saw the Nation of Domination and Undertaker brawling at ringside. Undertaker whipped Farouk into Johnson, who crashed headfirst into the steps and was thrown into the ring and pinned. Johnson and Undertaker argued after the match with Undertaker choke-slamming Johnson. Terrible match. Hart Foundation and Michaels and Austin did their angle with Bret explaining that he couldn't wrestle at King of the Ring and suggesting Michaels wrestles Austin. They agreed to wrestle each other but that Austin would still wrestle Pillman the next night on Raw. Owen Hart kept the IC belt beating Bob Holly with the sharpshooter in 3:17 of a decent match. If Holly was going to get a title shot this week, why did he lose to D'Lo Brown last week? Goldust pinned Hunter Hearst Helmsley in 3:49 with a schoolboy in a match where the winner would face Davey Boy Smith for the European title on the June 9th Raw. Chyna tried to interfere but Marlena stopped her. Chyna threw the ref over the top rope after the match. Bout was decent but Goldust got a big reaction. Legion of Doom beat Michaels and Austin via countout in 10:17 when the two brawled with each other. Michaels was about to go after the Hart Foundation, Austin tried to stop him but they fought each other and lost the match. Michaels was out of this world again taking tremendous bumps and made it a very good match until the finish, which was so weak the crowd even booed it. I've heard talk they'll keep this Michaels and Austin Odd Couple tag team champions for a while, but Old has been promised the belts down the line. They did another Mankind segment mainly showing his gimmick matches from Japan and also showed an ECW clip of his farewell talking about how he had so much respect as Cactus Jack that he doesn't have as Mankind. It was great again. He should be an actor on television rather than a pro wrestler with the way he can deliver a line. This may be a way to build up the first explosive barbed wire match in the WWF for later this year, since Atsushi Onita has talked about wanting to do that match in Madison Square Garden. Mankind beat Vega in 3:03 when Crush hit Vega in the face with a heart punch. Think about that for a second, although it makes no less sense than being pinned with a leg lock, and he was pinned. They worked hard but didn't get much heat. Fans cheered Mankind as expected. Crush and Vega fought with each other after the match and Farouk was about to break them up, but instead walked out and let them fight. Undertaker pinned Sid in 4:47 with a tombstone in a bad match. Sid didn't look like anyone I've seen that was coming back from a back injury and the flu. When Sid showed up, they told him he was doing a job for Undertaker. He said he didn't want to and was given some threats as to future employment and finally agreed to it. Nation of Domination, including Crush and Vega now back together with no explanation, attacked Undertaker. Sid choke-slammed Vega and Crush but was overpowered and both Sid and Undertaker were left laying and Farouk whipped Undertaker with a belt. Also on the card, Freddie Joe Floyd returned and beat T.L. Hopper. Blackjack Bradshaw beat Phil LaFon in a wound up with a four-way. Owen and Bulldog beat Holly and Jesse James when Bret hit JJ with a crutch. Crowd got totally out of control throwing things at the Hart Foundation. The ring announcer said they would have to stop the show if the fans didn't stop throwing things, which worked in reverse as it only made them toss even more debris. That's the downside of doing angles to incite a crowd, it incites them into being less controllable. After 10 minutes of them holding up the show and a plea by McMahon himself, they were able to restart the shotgun taping. Michaels and Austin did a face-to-face interview which ended up with Austin attacking Pillman as he was announcing. Final bout was Helmsley and Lawler versus Mankind and Johnson. Mankind turned on Johnson. I see a heel turn in Johnson's future going to the Nation of Domination. Helmsley then turned on Lawler. China ended up decking Lawler and Johnson pinned him with the Pearl River Plunge. The original idea of the pallbearer surprise has supposedly been changed and Papa Shango won't be part of the angle. WWF dropped Killer Kowalski from the payroll. The Rojo brothers, Jacques and Raymond, who hadn't talked in more than 2 years, were back talking. It was supposedly Raymond who initiated things as he followed Jacques home and they talked in Jacques' garage. With Jacques and Pierre's WCW contract up at the end of July and with WCW supposedly considering not renewing it, this mending fences may be a way to get them back into WWF, particularly since WWF is running Survivor Series this year in Montreal. Although those close to the situation said not to discount the idea Raymond was feeling Jacques out about going to WCW. WWF is back negotiating with Dan Severn about working with Ken Shamrock. Weekend house shows saw May 30th in San Jose draw $6,287 and $119,078. May 31st in Tacoma drew $5,664 and $104,459 and June 1st in Columbus, Ohio drew $4,554 and $71,445. For the week they averaged more than $8 per head in merchandise sales, which is again phenomenal. Notes on San Jose. 1. Leaf Cassidy pinned Holly in 5:38 with a power bomb. Cassidy was really good and carried it to a strong, fast-paced opener. 2 1/4 stars. 2. Blackjacks beat Furnace and LaFon in 7:07 when Bradshaw pinned Furnace. Bout was okay. 1 3/4 stars. 3. Rockabilly beat James in 4:50 with a neckbreaker after screwing up a DDT. Bad. 1/4 star. 4. Helmsley pinned Goldust in 10:11 when China tripped Goldust. Best match on the show. It was obvious they've been working for months as this was a cohesive and overly choreographed spotfest. A good comedy match nonetheless. Goldust got a huge pop and great heat throughout. 2.5 stars. 5. Legion of Doom beat Vega and Crush in 8:45 when Animal pinned Crush after Vega kicked him. Legion of Doom got the biggest pop of the night coming out, but the match sucked so bad it deflated the crowd. 1/4 star. 6. Mankind beat Rocky Maivia with a mandible claw in 12:12. Mankind came out with Bearer, so he was probably 75 to 80% booed. Maivia was cheered pretty much. Match wasn't good early, but the finishing sequence of near falls was the best on the show. 1 1/2 star. 7. Farouk pinned Johnson in 3:27 when Crush hit Johnson with a chair while ref Ken Shamrock was giving Vega a great belly-to-belly. Shamrock got the biggest pop of the three. They teased Johnson joining the Nation of Domination and Johnson gave the salute and hugged Johnson and Vega before turning on them. Terrible match. Dud. 8. Undertaker and Austin beat Owen and Bulldog via DQ in 9:09 when Pillman interfered. Austin with his neck injury didn't do much, which ruined the match, since it means Undertaker was selling for Owen most of the match. Undertaker doesn't sell well, plus nobody believes his selling anyway because of the gimmick, not to mention the height difference. Anyway, by the time he made the hot tag to Austin, there was only a small pop, and Pillman hit the ring for the DQ. 1/4 star. Results were the same the entire weekend except Goldust beat Helmsley in Columbus. The photo of Michaels wearing an Outsiders t-shirt appears in the July issue of one of the Napolitano magazines, which should further endear Michaels to the WWF. One more note regarding Michaels and his contract. If he did have a written clause saying he was guaranteed to be the highest paid guy in the company and McMahon didn't renegotiate his contract when Brett got the better deal, then that's a contract breach and he could leave anytime he wants. The fact that he can't leave tells me there is more to the story. Austin was told by one doctor this week that his injury could be the beginning of a serious neck problem, and the doctor suggested he retire. He's going for a second opinion. Sultan is still out of action with rib injuries. Henry Godwin's neck wasn't fully healed, so he's been out the past 2 weeks after coming back. Vader had nasal surgery this past week and is expected back for the June 13th show in Montreal. New card for Philadelphia on June 20th and Nassau Coliseum on June 21st is Undertaker vs. Austin, Sid vs. Mankind, Michaels vs. Bulldog, Road Warriors vs. Godwins, Goldust vs. Vader, Helmsley vs. Maivia, Owen and Pillman and Neidhart vs. Farouk and Crush and Vega and Furnace and LaFon vs. Headbangers. Godwins and James are in a comedian Cletus T. Judd music video for country music television. Diana Smith will be competing this week in the Mrs. Calgary Beauty pageant. She won a Calgary Beauty contest as the Calgary Sunshine Girl around 1984. Ratings for the weekend of May 24th saw Livewire at 1.1 and Superstars at 1.3, and for May 31st, Livewire at 1.0 and Superstars at 1.4. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. June 9, 1997.